All right, so it looks like we're back and ready for another deep dive. This time we're tackling tips for boosting English skills. And we've got this pretty extensive collection of sources here, not just like your typical, top 10 tips you see everywhere online. We're going to dig deeper and pull out the stuff that really matters.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, anyone can give you a list of things to do, but it's a whole different ballgame when you understand the why behind it. That way you can figure out how to make it work for you.
Absolutely. And one thing that jumps out from all this material is this idea of immersion. Like, not just dipping your toes in the water, but really surrounding yourself with English.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. Actually, this source compares it to like living in an English-speaking country. Obviously, not everyone can just pack up and move, But the point is you can create that environment wherever you are.
So what kind of things are they suggesting?
Well, it could be as simple as changing your phone's language settings or following English-speaking creators online. Even just labeling things around your house with like English sticky notes.
Yeah.
All those little things start to add up.
I see how that constant exposure can make a difference. It's almost like forcing your brain to start thinking in English, right?
Exactly. Like you're rewiring those neural pathways. We even talk about like talking to yourself in English, which I know might sound a little weird, but...
Well, I talk to myself sometimes anyway. Just usually not in English. But I get the logic there. It's like practicing your inner monologue in a new language.
That's it. So like narrating your day, describing what you're doing, even just your random thoughts out loud in English. It might feel a little silly at first, but it gets you thinking in those sentence structures and grappling with vocabulary. And you get more comfortable with how your own voice sounds in English.
So it's not about sounding perfect. It's about getting that fluency through practice. And I think that helps with the fear a lot of learners have about speaking up.
Oh, absolutely. And actually, that's something else they emphasize. Like, mistakes are actually good. They're valuable.
In what way?
It's when you're struggling a bit. That your brain is actually like making those new connections.
Right. It's like pushing yourself out of your comfort zone.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about like the inner world of thinking and practicing to yourself, but what about actual conversations? I see here they mention language exchange apps and online communities. Is that stuff actually effective?
Oh, it could be super effective. Especially if you're someone who learns best in a social setting.
Makes sense.
You get to connect with native speakers from all over the world.
And it's not just a one-way street either.
Right. You're helping them practice your language.
Yeah.
And they're helping you with English.
Plus, I bet it's a lot less pressure than like a formal classroom.
Yeah, a lot of learners find it way less intimidating. There's not that same like fear of making mistakes.
Yeah.
Everyone's there to learn and support each other.
That's great. So it seems like the big takeaway here is active practice over passive learning.
Definitely. And they go into some really cool methods for vocabulary too, not just like memorizing lists.
I've tried that. Never really worked for me.
Yeah, it's all about using the words you learn, like in context.
Yeah.
So they recommend picking a few new words each week and then actually using them. Don't just memorize the definition. Create sentences with them. Write little stories. Even practice conversations where you try to use them.
That's such a good point. It's like if you think about learning a song you love on guitar, suddenly those scales aren't just boring exercises. They're like the building blocks to create something beautiful. And it's the same with English, The vocabulary is there to help you express your thoughts and ideas.
Exactly. You said it perfectly. And, they take it a step further. They suggest focusing on words related to your interests. So like if you're into cooking, you might learn culinary terms in English.
I love that. It makes it so much more engaging. You're not just learning English in the abstract. You're learning how to talk about the things you already care about.
And that makes the knowledge way more useful too. It's not just stuck in a textbook.
Right. It's part of your life.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered immersion and vocabulary building. What else do they get into?
Well, pronunciation gets a good chunk of attention, which, can be a bit of a sensitive topic for some learners.
For sure. Sometimes it feels like the biggest hurdle.
Yeah, but what I found interesting is they emphasize clarity over accent. Like, they literally quote, "Even if you know the right words and grammar, poor pronunciation can make it hard for others to understand you."
That's reassuring. I'm always so worried about sounding perfect. But maybe that's not the most important thing.
Right. It's about being understood.
So what are some other tips for improving pronunciation?
Well, they say to really listen to how native speakers sound. Pay attention to where they stress words in a sentence, where they pause, the overall rhythm and intonation.
It's like learning a new musical instrument almost. Training your ear to hear those nuances,
You got it.
and then practicing to reproduce them.
And they have some cool suggestions for practicing too. One is recording yourself speaking and then comparing it to a native speaker saying the same thing.
Ooh, that sounds a little terrifying, like holding up a mirror to your pronunciation.
It could be a little cringy at first, but it's one of the best ways to see where you might need to improve.
And luckily there's so much tech to help with that now.
Oh, yeah. There are apps that can give you instant feedback on your pronunciation. It's like having a pronunciation coach in your pocket.
Wow, that's amazing.
It is. But even with all the tools and resources, there's one thing that's absolutely crucial, and that's consistency.
Ah, yes, the classic advice. Making English a regular part of your life.
They make a good point, though. It's a marathon, not a sprint. You're not going to see progress every single day. There will be plateaus and moments of frustration.
For sure.
But the key is to keep going. Even if it's just for a few minutes each day, those small, consistent efforts are what lead to fluency.
And I bet patience plays a big role in that
Oh,
too.
huge. It's so easy to get discouraged when you feel like you're not progressing fast enough.
Especially when you compare yourself to others.
Yeah, and they actually recommend setting realistic goals. Break those big goals down into smaller, more manageable steps.
That makes a lot of sense. Instead of focusing on becoming fluent, you might aim to learn 5 new words a week or have a 5-minute conversation in English every day.
That's it. And those small wins help build your confidence and keep you motivated.
Because you're actually seeing those little bits of progress.
Exactly.
And it reminds you that every little step forward is a step closer to fluency.
You got it.
So we've talked about immersion, active practice, vocabulary pronunciation, even the mental side of things like consistency and patience. There's a lot to take in here. Is there anything else that really stood out to you from all this material?
One thing that really resonated with me was the idea that learning a language can actually change how you see the world, even your own native language.
I hadn't thought of it that way. How so?
Well, when you're learning a new language, you're not just learning new words and grammar, you're being exposed to new ways of thinking and expressing yourself.
I can see that. Different languages have different ways of structuring sentences.
Exactly.
Different idioms and expressions. It's like learning a new code for decoding reality.
And as you get more fluent in English, you might start to notice things in language that you hadn't before, even in your native language. You become more aware of those subtleties, how language shapes our thoughts and perceptions.
That's really interesting. So it's like learning English doesn't just give you a new way to communicate. It actually expands your understanding of language itself.
Exactly. It's a pretty powerful thought to consider as you go on your language learning journey.
It is. Wow. Well, I think we've covered a lot of ground in this first part of our deep dive into English language learning.
Yeah, it really is a journey, isn't it? And speaking of journeys, I think it's time to dig into some of the more specific ways to achieve that daily immersion we talked about.
Yeah, you mentioned things like changing your phone's language
Yeah.
and labeling stuff around your house, which are great starting points. But I'm curious what other creative ideas they've got.
Well, one thing they suggest is incorporating English into activities you already do, like listening to podcasts while you commute or exercise, even doing chores around the house.
Oh, I like that. Multitasking for your brain.
Big
Getting
smart.
stuff done and improving your English at the same time. And honestly, with so many podcasts out there these days, there's got to be something for everyone.
Oh, for sure. Whether you're into true crime, comedy, science, history, whatever, there's a podcast out there for you. And it's not just about understanding what they're saying either.
Right, yeah.
You're picking up new vocabulary, getting used to the natural rhythm of spoken English, even absorbing some cultural references
It's like learning without even realizing it.
Kind of sneaky, right?
Haha, yeah. Now, what about for people who are more visual learners?
Oh, they have suggestions for that too.
Yeah.
They recommend watching TV shows or movies in English, ideally with English subtitles at first,
That makes sense.
so you can connect the spoken words with the written form, which can help a lot with vocab and grammar.
Plus, it's way more fun than staring at a textbook.
Right. You're entertained while you learn.
Win-win.
Exactly. And speaking of enjoyable ways to learn, they also talk about reading in English.
Okay, but that doesn't mean you have to jump into Shakespeare right away.
No. Start with something manageable. Blog posts, articles you find online. Even just switching your social media feed to English can make a difference.
Yeah, just that daily exposure.
Exactly. It's about making English a natural part of your routine, not something that feels forced.
Okay, so we've talked about passive immersion. What about actively practicing speaking? We mentioned language exchange apps before. Any other ideas?
Yeah, they recommend checking out language cafes or conversation clubs.
Oh, what are those?
They're basically informal gatherings where people come together to practice speaking English.
Sounds kind of fun.
Yeah, and it's a relaxed, supportive environment.
Plus, you get to meet new people.
Exactly. People who are also interested in language learning, which can be really motivating,
So it's less intimidating than one-on-one exchanges.
especially for beginners. Everyone's in the same boat. You know, making mistakes and learning from each other.
So there's that built-in support system.
Exactly.
I like that. So it seems like they really push for finding opportunities to speak in real-life situations.
Yeah, whether online or in person. And they even give advice for those who might feel nervous about speaking up.
Like what?
They say to start small.
Yeah.
Just greet people in English. Ask basic questions. Baby steps.
Gradually building up your confidence.
Exactly.
And those small interactions can lead to bigger conversations later on.
You never know where it might lead.
All right, so we've covered listening, watching, speaking. What about the dreaded grammar?
Oh, they talk about that too. But their approach is pretty different. They don't say you have to spend hours studying grammar textbooks. Right. Or memorizing all the rules.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
That stuff always made my eyes glaze over.
They encourage learners to focus on acquiring grammar naturally, through exposure and practice.
So by just immersing yourself in the language.
You'll start to internalize the rules without having to consciously study them.
Like learning by osmosis almost.
Exactly.
Interesting.
And they even recommend paying attention to the grammar you see in the stuff you're consuming.
So like when you're reading a book or listening to a podcast.
Yeah, try to notice how sentences are structured, how verbs are conjugated different tenses.
So being an active observer rather than just passively absorbing it.
That's it. And as you start to notice those patterns, you can try to use them in your own speaking and writing.
That makes way more sense than just memorizing rules.
Right. It becomes more like a puzzle to solve.
Oh, I like that. Okay, so speaking of things we enjoy, what about music? A lot of people find that listening to English music helps them learn.
Oh, they talk about music too.
Yeah.
They actually have a whole section on it.
No way.
Yeah, they say it can be a great tool for pronunciation vocabulary, even understanding cultural references.
Music is so catchy. It's like your brain can't help but absorb the language.
And they recommend not just listening passively,
Yeah.
but really engaging with the lyrics.
What do you mean?
Look up words you don't know. Sing along to practice pronunciation. Even try translating your favorite songs.
That's a fun idea.
Right. And they say music can be really powerful for connecting with the emotional side of learning.
How so?
When you're listening to music you love, you're more likely to remember the words and phrases because they're tied to a feeling or a memory.
It's like those jingles from childhood that you never forget.
Exactly. Music has a way of sticking with us.
For sure.
And they even suggest creating playlists of songs that focus on specific grammar or vocabulary.
So if you're working on the past tense,
You can make a playlist of songs that use the past tense a lot.
that's so clever.
It's like your own personalized language learning soundtrack.
I love that.
And that brings us back to one of the key themes of this source, personalization.
Right, finding what works for you.
Exactly. They give you all these different strategies and techniques, but it's up to you to decide which ones resonate with you and how you want to use them.
It's like creating your own unique learning path.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay, so we've covered a ton of ground in this deep dive, from practical immersion techniques to how learning a language can change your perspective. As we wrap up this second part, anything else from the source that you want to highlight?
One thing that really stuck with me was how much they emphasize celebrating your progress, no matter how small.
Yeah, they mentioned that before, about acknowledging those small victories. But why is that so important?
Because learning a language can be a long and challenging journey. There will be times when you're frustrated, times when you feel like you're not making any progress.
Totally.
And it's during those times that it's especially important to remember how far you've come and to celebrate even the tiniest achievements.
Like giving yourself a pat on the back for all the hard work.
Exactly. And they even suggest keeping a language learning journal.
Ooh, what's that?
It's where you track your progress, write down new words you've learned, reflect on your challenges and successes.
I like that, like creating a tangible record of your journey.
It can be super motivating to look back and see how far you've come, especially when you're feeling discouraged.
So it's a reminder that every step forward, no matter how small, is a step closer to fluency.
Exactly. And as we head into the final part of our deep dive, I think it's important to keep that in mind. Language learning is a journey, not a destination. And it's a journey that's filled with amazing discoveries and rewards along the way.
I love that it's all about the journey and not the destination.
Yeah, and speaking of the journey, there's one more thing I think we should touch on. The emotional side of language learning.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about it that way. What do you mean by the emotional side?
Well, they point out that it can be a real roller coaster of emotions. There are moments of excitement and accomplishment, of course, but there are also times when you feel frustrated or self-conscious or even scared.
Oh, yeah. I can definitely relate to that. Some days I feel like I'm making great progress, and then other days I feel like I'm back at square one.
It's super common, and the source really encourages learners to acknowledge those emotions. Don't try to pretend they don't exist. Embrace them.
So it's more about learning how to deal with them in a healthy way.
Exactly. They even suggest seeking out support from other learners, whether it's online or in person.
Yeah, that makes sense. Sharing your experiences with others who get it can be really helpful.
It's like having a built-in cheer squad. It's so much easier to stay motivated when you know you're not alone.
Right. Like misery loves company, but in a good way.
Yeah. So they recommend finding a language learning buddy or joining a community. Having that sense of connection and support can make a huge difference.
It turns language learning into more of a shared experience.
Exactly. And it can help you stay accountable to your goals too.
Oh, yeah. Like having a workout buddy, but for your brain.
Exactly. Speaking of brains, this source also talks about how learning a new language can actually benefit your cognitive health.
Oh, yeah, I've heard about that. Like it helps keep your brain sharp as you age. But I'm curious what this source says specifically.
Well, they say it's like a full-blown workout for your brain. It challenges you in so many ways: memory, attention, problem solving, critical thinking.
So it's not just about learning words and grammar. It's about strengthening those mental muscles.
Exactly. And they even cite research that shows bilingual people tend to have better cognitive flexibility, better memory, and even a delayed onset of age-related decline.
Wow, that's amazing. So learning English isn't just a practical skill, it's an investment in your long-term brain health.
You got it. And they even suggest that the benefits go beyond the language itself.
What do you mean?
They say that by learning how to learn a new language,
Yeah.
you're developing skills that you can use in other areas of your life too.
Oh, I see. Like once you've tackled the challenge of learning a new language, you feel more confident taking on other challenges.
It's a great way to put it.
So it's not just about expanding your vocabulary, it's about expanding your mind.
I love that, and I think that's a really powerful message to end on.
It is. I feel like I've gained a whole new perspective on language learning. It's not just about being able to communicate, it's about challenging myself, expanding my horizons, becoming a more well-rounded person.
And the best part is it's a lifelong journey. There's always more to learn, new nuances to discover, new ways to connect with the world.
This deep dive has given us a lot to think about and a ton of practical tips to try out. I feel like I have a whole new set of tools to help me reach my goals.
Me too. And remember, this is just the beginning. The world of English learning is huge and always changing.
So for anyone listening who's feeling inspired to take their English to the next level, what's one thing they can do today?
I'd say start by finding something you're genuinely excited about in English. Maybe it's a specific topic or a favorite author or musician, or even a particular country or culture. And then find a way to make that part of your learning.
Okay.
Read a book, listen to a podcast, watch a movie. Find a language partner who shares your interests. Make the process enjoyable and relevant to you.
It's about finding what you love and running with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And remember, every step you take is a step forward. Be patient with yourself, and most importantly, have fun.
Great advice. Well, I think that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of English language learning. It's been a fantastic journey, and I hope everyone's feeling inspired to keep learning.
Me too. The world is full of amazing languages waiting to be discovered. So keep exploring, keep learning, and keep connecting. Happy learning, everyone.